And that brings us to our final presentation of the day. So unfortunately, this researcher was unable to join us today, so we won't be able to ask questions afterwards. But if you have any questions for her or any of the researchers that you have heard today, feel free to reach out to NOFIA. Our email is back in the chat a little ways. And we can connect you with any of the researchers that we have had today. So here is our final presentation for the day.
Hi, my name is Frédérique Lavallée, and today I will present my master's project, which is about agroforestry and intensive grazing for maximizing carbon stocks within cattle industry. Before we jump in my project, let me introduce some of the facts that motivate us to start this experiment at first. Human influence on the climate system is clear, and recent anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases are at their highest in history. This chart shows future GHG emissions scenarios under a range of assumptions. As you can see, if all countries achieve their current pledges for emission reductions, there is a possibility of limiting warming this century. But if no effort is made, continued emission will cause further warming and long-lasting changes in all components of the climate system. Evidence points to agriculture as one of the first intents of human-caused increase in GHG. The cattle industry is a sector that emits significant amounts of greenhouse gases. In Canada, greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture account for 8.1% of total emissions, and about 40% of these are produced by ruminants. Predictions of future climate change are not like weather forecasts, and it's not possible to make definitive predictions of how climate will evolve over the next century and beyond. But we can still make predictions about what the tendencies will look like. What does climate warming mean for agriculture? Fewer frost days and longer growing seasons, which might sound appealing, but we also predict a huge increase in high temperature events and change in precipitation patterns, increasing flood and drought in the same year, drier summers, and increased winter and spring precipitation. Those expected change will have a major impact on our farming conditions. So as we can see, agriculture is responsible for a part of global greenhouse gas emissions. However, improved practices and soil management can reduce these emissions and sequester some of the CO2 removed from the atmosphere by plants as carbon in soil organic matter. In addition, wise soil management can yield powerful synergies and can help buffer crop and pasture system against the impacts of climate change. Knowing that conditions will not be the same in the upcoming years, we believe it is essential to rethink our agricultural model, and that is what we want to do with our research project, which aims at developing innovative agronomic practices to increase carbon stocks in soils and biomass in order to offset the greenhouse gas emitted by the cattle farming activities. The development of agroforestry systems on permanent grasslands is a first example of an innovative management practice that can rapidly increase carbon storage in soils and biomass. Trees help to maintain and restore soil health. Their additional organic matter input can yield powerful synergies such as enhanced fertility and productivity, increased biodiversity, reduced erosion, runoff, and water pollution, and can help buffer crop and pasture systems against the impacts of climate change. Trees can also create a microclimate, which is beneficial for animal welfare and crops growth. And in addition, they bring a new source of revenue. A second example of an innovative practice is the intensification of pasture management, where grazing of the herd occurs in rotation over a given area for a short period of time. Such management can increase the storage of stability of soil carbon, allowing a longer rest period to the forage and returning more plant residues after grazing. It can also improve soil quality by increasing net primary production and soil organic matter. It also limits soil compaction risks and favorizes low soil density and macro aggregates. My master's project consists in combining those two practices. The implementation of agroforestry system on intensively managed pastures could be doubly beneficial in terms of carbon storage. This has never been evaluated and no such system has been tried in our province. We have the chance to collaborate with a fourth-generation family farm. They had the exceptional generosity to accept working with us, even if it meant to replant areas their grandfather had cleared less than 90 years ago. It represents a unique opportunity for the partners to implement a long-term experimental research site and for us to conduct this research in actual operating conditions. The experiment is divided in two treatments, repeated 4 times. The first treatment is the one currently applied on the farm, which is a continuous grazing for 7 days and no trees. It represents the business as usual scenario. The experiment is divided in 2 treatments, repeated 4 times. The first treatment is the one currently applied on the farm, which is continuous grazing for 7 days and no tree. It represents the business as usual scenario. The second treatment is an agroforestry grazing system where grazing is carried out in intensive rotation within pastures bordered with hedgerows of planted trees. The hedgerows are subdivided in 7 combinations to evaluate the impact of different tree species planted alone or in mixture. We chose 3 species that first are well adapted to the area's climate, and second, have opposite characteristics so that we can have a certain diversity and observe what each of them can bring to the ecosystem. We selected a hardwood species, the red maple, a fast-growing species, hybrid poplar, so that we can start measuring quickly, and finally, the white spruce, which is a coniferous. Those trees complement each other very well, and their combination will create balance and a continuity in the hedgerow's growth. We started the experimental site setup last spring. The site selected to implement the experimental plots has first been characterized by sampling soils at 4 depths, with which we will determine the initial quantities of carbon stored in soil and root biomass. We started the experimental site setup last spring. The site selected to implement the experimental plots has first been characterized by sampling soils at 4 depths, with which we will determine the initial quantities of carbon stored in soil and root biomass. Then we prepared the ground, measured and marked every tree position to avoid misplacing trees during plantation. And finally, we planted our 2,400 trees. After that, we applied mulch at the bottom of every tree to minimize weed competition and keep the ground moisture. After that, we were ready to add the animal-related material, the fences and the water system. And we had the time to make 2 full rotations with the herds through the system during summer and started lab work last fall. Next spring, we intend to maintain our trees by pruning, adding mulch, and replacing the dead trees. Since now everything is ready to properly welcome the herds, we hope to start grazing as soon as the snow will melt and do as many rotations as we can during summer. We also will conduct a second samplings of soil and roots on grazed areas and hedgerows at the end of the second growing season to compare the short-term impact of the agroforestry grazing system to the business as usual scenario. Based on the few studies leaded in similar conditions to ours, we estimate that over a 40-year period, we can store as much as 9 tons of CO2 equivalent per year per hectare. It is a high value, but Just to give you an idea, if only 10% of Quebec and Ontario's 700,000 hectares in tame or seeded and natural pasture was converted to silvopasture, about 3.7% of Quebec and Ontario's greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture could be offset. In conclusion, this project represents a unique opportunity to develop and measure the impact of very promising practices. We don't know if the system will offset all of the greenhouse gas emissions produced by the farming activities, but regardless of what we will be able to measure short term, agroforestry will certainly bring many benefits to the environment. There is an important role for agriculture in greenhouse gas mitigation. Realizing the potential for climate change mitigation through global soil management will require the capacity to measure and monitor greenhouse gas reductions with acceptable accuracy and quantifiable uncertainty, and we hope to contribute to this knowledge with our research. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you learned a little bit more about agroforestry during my presentation. Have a nice day.
So as I mentioned before, Frédérique couldn't join us today, but if you do have any questions for her, just get in touch with NOFIA and we can put you in touch with her or any of the other researchers that we have featured today. And that brings us to our conclusion today. So I would like to sincerely thank all of the researchers and presenters that we had today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in to watch. I hope that you all learned something useful. I will just remind everyone that after we wrap up today, we are going to be doing 2 draws for 2 lovely Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association rain jackets. And you've all already been added to the draw pile just by attending. And if you're the lucky winner, then we will get in touch with you in the next couple of days. NOFIA will also be posting this recording of the webinar and some of the slideshows that our presenters used. We'll be posting those online, so keep an eye on our NOFIA social media channels. And I would also like to thank the Sudbury West Soil and Crop Improvement Association for their support of today's event through a Tier 1 grant. So once again, thank you to all of our presenters who shared their projects, and thank you to all of the attendees who tuned in. Have an excellent rest of your Tuesday.